Here's what you missed last week on The Forensic Factor. The small town of Oakland, Virginia, a usually quiet and rural area, was recently shaken by the murder of 23-year-old Victoria Vasquez. Footage of Annabelle Smith and Steve Parker.
Is there someone else?
I'm really sorry. It just happened. Don't be mad at Victoria.
Footage of Steve Parker and Victoria Vasquez. Their happiness did not last long. She was murdered on this night after being walked home. Victoria was found dead the next day in her apartment with multiple stab wounds. The victim, Victoria Vasquez. Steve Parker under arrest for the murder of his girlfriend, Victoria Vasquez. New episode on The Forensic Factor. Steve Parker was a primary suspect for the murder of his girlfriend, Victoria Vasquez, which took place on August 19, 2016. The problem was that Steve had an alibi. He was at the home of John and Allie Vasquez, asking for permission to take Victoria's hand in marriage at the time of the murder, and they testified on his behalf.
Well, my ex-girlfriend Annabelle Smith was very upset when I broke up with her and started to date Victoria, and I think she had some signs of depression and anxiety, and she knows where she lives. I suspect her.
Investigators had to take a step back and think, who would want to take the life of this young woman? Who could be the next suspect? Annabelle Smith was placed under arrest as a suspect for the murder of Victoria Vasquez. Investigators decided to take a second look at the crime scene in hopes of finding new evidence which can prove suspect Annabelle Smith guilty of the murder of Victoria Vasquez. Here, a forensic investigator, Abigail Gottlieb.
At the crime scene, we had an extremely interesting finding. First, we found a fingerprint at the doorstep of the victim's bedroom. This fingerprint did not match the fingerprints of Annabelle Smith, and when we entered it into APHIS, there were no matches. It was considered inconclusive evidence. 2 hairs were also found on the carpet of the victim's apartment at the crime scene.
Who did these hairs belong to? Could 2 stray hairs solve the crime of Victoria Vasquez's horrific murder?
Hi, I'm Dr. Shea, an expert in forensics and hair DNA. The hairs found at the scene were extremely useful in the investigation. After taking the DNA out of the hair follicle, we came to an amazing conclusion regarding this case. 1 hair belonged to the victim, Victoria Vasquez. The other, more important hair almost matched the DNA of suspect Annabelle Smith. The most amazing thing about this hair was that the DNA had an exact half match to the DNA of the suspect. Most likely, the murderer was one of Annabelle's parents, but we cannot be sure of which without other evidence.
The previously disregarded stray fingerprint ultimately saved and solved the case of the murder of Victoria Vasquez. Both parents of Annabelle Smith were taken in as suspects of first-degree murder. The mother of Annabelle, Mrs. Colleen Smith, had a fingerprint that exactly matched the one on the doorpost at the crime scene. She was found guilty of murder and sent to life in prison based on this conviction. In court, she admitted to the murder and said she did it to take revenge for her daughter Annabelle Smith, who claims she had no knowledge of her mother's actions or intentions. Using forensic evidence, the case of Victoria Vasquez's murder was solved, and that is all on The Forensic Factor.